It started with a question that no one in the royal household wanted to ask out loud. What happens when the very people who are supposed to be part of the monarchy's most protected inner circle turn into the greatest threat to its legacy? For decades, the British royal family has maintained a careful balance between duty, tradition, and personal emotion, a balance so delicate that even the slightest ripple can create waves that crash across the world. But now, those ripples have grown into a storm that has shaken Buckingham Palace to its very core. And at the center of it all are two names that have become inseparable from controversy: Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The tension has been building for years, though few outside the inner circles fully understood its depth. To the public, Harry has always been the charming prince, the beloved younger son of Princess Diana, a man whose personal struggles and emotional vulnerability made him relatable in a world often dominated by protocol and appearances. Meghan, on the other hand, entered the royal landscape like a whirlwind: American, modern, confident, and fearless. Their love story captivated millions, a fairy tale in its simplest, most dramatic form. But beneath the public smiles, royal appearances, and perfectly curated Instagram moments, the fractures were forming. Deep fractures. Fractures that would eventually grow into cracks so large that even the crown could no longer ignore them. And now, in what insiders are calling one of the most shocking moves in modern royal history, King Charles and Princess and have made a decision that could redefine what it means to be a member of the British royal family. They are calling on the United Kingdom's parliament to take an action that no monarch has attempted in decades: to officially strip Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of all royal titles, privileges, and protections. This is not just a symbolic gesture. This is the kind of action that sends shockwaves through palaces, political corridors, and households across the globe. Imagine, for a moment, the titles and honors you were born into suddenly being revoked. The privileges you assumed were yours for life, gone. The public roles and influence you built, erased in an instant. That is exactly what is at stake here. But what led to this unprecedented decision? To understand the magnitude of it, we have to step inside the palace walls, metaphorically, if not literally. Behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, tensions have been simmering for years. Every slight, every public interview, every perceived betrayal has been catalogued and discussed in hushed conversations. Princess, and often overlooked in discussions about royal power, has emerged as one of the quiet but fiercest voices advocating for a course of action. She has watched the family's image be challenged repeatedly, seen scandals magnified in the press, and recognized the threat that Harry and Meghan pose not just to titles, but to the integrity of the monarchy itself. And King Charles, having assumed the throne with the weight of centuries of expectation on his shoulders, has realized that maintaining the status quo is no longer an option. In their eyes, discretion has passed the point of usefulness. It's time to act, and act decisively. What makes this story so compelling and so urgently relevant is the timing. The palace has carefully managed public perception for decades. It has controlled leaks, shaped narratives, and protected family members from scrutiny. But now, events have escalated to a point where the crown cannot hide behind silence. It's no longer just about media speculation or public opinion. It's about formal action, about setting a precedent that will reverberate for generations. And it's about confronting a personal and political reality that Harry and Meghan may not have anticipated. That the privileges they took for granted were contingent, and that the crown holds the ultimate authority to withdraw them. From a distance, the story may seem like a familiar narrative of royal drama: feuding family members, public disagreements, and media frenzy. But what sets this apart is the convergence of power, personal conflict, and legal maneuvering. King Charles is not simply angry or disappointed. He is strategically mobilizing resources, both legal and political, to formalize a course of action that has been quietly brewing behind closed doors. And Princess Anne's role in this cannot be overstated. Known for her stoicism, discipline, and unwavering commitment to duty, she has become the voice of authority and accountability in a situation that could easily spiral into chaos. Together, their actions represent not just a personal decision, but a defining moment for the institution they serve. For the public, the implications are staggering. What does it mean to be a royal without a title? Without privileges, protections, or ceremonial roles? How will the world perceive Harry and Meghan once the formal process is underway? And most importantly, how will the family reconcile this move with the history of forgiveness, love, and public duty that has defined the monarchy for generations? These questions linger like shadows over Buckingham Palace, raising tension in ways that no interview, statement, or royal appearance ever could. The intrigue is compounded by leaks, rumors, and unverified reports that circulate faster than any official statement can keep up with. Every newspaper headline, every social media post, every whispered conversation becomes part of a larger narrative, one that has already captivated global audiences. And yet, even with the magnitude of these decisions, one cannot ignore the human element. At its core, this is a story about family, about loyalty, betrayal, and the delicate balance between personal emotion and institutional responsibility. King Charles, Princess Anne, Harry, and Meghan are not just public figures. They are individuals navigating relationships that are strained by history, circumstance, and global scrutiny. The stakes are not only political, they are profoundly personal. Every letter sent, every conversation held, every decision made carries the weight of familial bonds as well as public expectation. It is this tension between personal and institutional responsibility that fuels the drama and keeps audiences captivated. As we prepare to explore the events that have led to this moment, one question remains at the forefront. What will Harry and Meghan do next? Will they confront the situation head-on, attempt reconciliation, or resist the authority of the crown? And more importantly, what consequences will they face if they fail to comply with the actions set in motion by King Charles and Princess Anne? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the beating heart of a story that continues to unfold, one that promises drama, revelation, and emotional stakes at every turn. By the end of this exposé, you will have seen the full scope of this royal crisis. You will understand the intricate web of relationships, decisions, and historical context that led to this unprecedented action. You will witness the strategies, the conflicts, and the emotional highs and lows that define a family under the intense scrutiny of the world. And you will be left asking the same question that has gripped the palace, the media, and millions of viewers worldwide. Can a royal family survive such a rupture? And what does it mean for the future of the monarchy when its own members are stripped of everything they once held dear? But the most shocking revelations are yet to come. Because even as King Charles prepares to formally act, even as Princess Anne solidifies her stance, there are secrets, communications, and decisions that have remained hidden from the public eye. Decisions that, when revealed, will challenge everything you thought you knew about Harry, Meghan, and the royal family as a whole. It began with a letter. Not just any letter, but a document that carried the weight of centuries of tradition, authority, and consequence. The kind of letter that, once delivered, could no longer be ignored, delayed, or dismissed. In the hushed corridors of Buckingham Palace, it was received with a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and disbelief. For the first time in decades, the monarchy was not only preparing to act, it was preparing to act against its own. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, once celebrated, once adored by millions, were now facing the most serious confrontation of their royal lives. And at the center of it stood King Charles, wielding the authority of a sovereign whose patience had finally reached its limit. The document itself was carefully drafted, reviewed by legal advisors, and meticulously worded to avoid any ambiguity. Every sentence, every phrase, carried a deliberate tone, firm, unwavering, and final. The message was clear. The crown could no longer tolerate the behaviors, public statements, and actions that threatened the integrity of the monarchy. Stripping royal titles was no longer a theoretical possibility. It had become a formal, actionable plan. The letter outlined the request to Parliament to officially revoke the royal titles, privileges, and protections of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. This was not an empty threat. It was a calculated, high-stakes move with implications that would ripple far beyond the palace walls. In private conversations that followed, King Charles emphasized that this was not about personal grievances, spite, or a desire to humiliate. On the contrary, it was about preserving the monarchy itself. For decades, royal protocols and traditions had been respected, not just by family members, but by the public. Any deviation, especially one as public and controversial as the Sussexes' behavior, risked undermining centuries of accumulated trust, loyalty, and symbolism. Charles understood that failing to act could set a dangerous precedent, signaling to the world that the monarchy's rules were negotiable, contingent, or unenforceable. And that was a risk he was unwilling to take. Princess, and often seen as the quiet disciplinarian of the family, played a pivotal role in shaping the response. Unlike some who might have preferred to sweep issues under the rug, she approached the situation with pragmatism and resolve. She had watched, for years, as the media frenzy surrounding Harry and Meghan grew. Every interview, every public statement, every leak carefully dissected and amplified. She had seen the consequences, strained relationships, public embarrassment, and, most critically, a tarnished image of the monarchy. Her position was unequivocal, action was necessary, and discretion had its limits. When she spoke to King Charles about the urgency of formal action, it was with the authority of someone who had long understood the delicate balance between duty and family. The decision to involve Parliament was both unprecedented and strategically calculated. The monarchy rarely involves the legislative body in matters of family conflict. Titles and privileges are traditionally the domain of the sovereign, but by formalizing the request through Parliament, Charles ensured the process was legitimate, transparent, and binding. It was a move that sent a clear signal. This was not personal revenge, it was institutional necessity. Advisors within Buckingham Palace noted that this approach also protected the crown from potential public backlash. By framing the issue as a matter of formal procedure rather than emotional impulse, the monarchy maintained the moral high ground, even while preparing to deliver what many would perceive as a devastating blow. But the royal ultimatum was about more than legalities. It was a direct confrontation with Harry and Meghan's public narrative. For years, the Sussexes had positioned themselves as victims of an institution they claimed to be rigid, unyielding, and unfair. They had framed interviews, podcasts, and public appearances in ways that highlighted personal grievances while downplaying responsibility or accountability. The ultimatum challenged that narrative, turning the lens back on them and asserting that accountability within the royal family was non-negotiable. It sent a message that the crown could no longer be manipulated, misrepresented, or coerced by media spectacles or personal branding campaigns. Inside the palace, tension ran high. Advisors debated every possible scenario, from media fallout to international reactions. Every word of communication with the Sussexes was scrutinized for potential leaks, misinterpretation, or escalation. Security measures were heightened, not just for the safety of the sovereign, but to prevent information from reaching the press prematurely. Even minor details, the timing of meetings, the phrasing of statements, the order in which information was released, were meticulously orchestrated. The palace understood that in today's age, a single tweet, a single leak, could spiral into a global controversy. And in this case, they could not afford mistakes. The stakes were intensely personal as well. King Charles had long struggled with the public narrative surrounding Harry, the portrayal of his son as alienated, misunderstood, or mistreated. These narratives were not entirely new. Media coverage of the royal family has always been a delicate mix of fascination and speculation. But the scale and intensity of the Sussexes' media presence had escalated beyond anything previously seen. Interviews with high-profile media outlets, documentaries, and statements on social media had created a perception of a family divided by betrayal. Charles, who had spent a lifetime navigating the complex interplay between public duty and private emotion, recognized that allowing this narrative to continue unchallenged would weaken the monarchy's authority and erode public trust. But even as the letter was sent and formal procedures were set in motion, uncertainty lingered. How would Harry and Meghan respond? Would they confront the ultimatum directly, issuing a public statement or engaging in negotiations? Or would they retreat further into private exile, amplifying the perception of estrangement? These questions haunted the palace. Every advisor had a different theory, each more speculative than the last. Some believed that the couple would attempt a legal challenge, asserting their rights based on previous agreements or royal conventions. Others predicted a media offensive, using interviews or documentaries to sway public opinion. But none could anticipate the full scope of the palace's resolve, or the lengths to which Charles and were willing to go to enforce it. At the same time, the palace was acutely aware of the international spotlight. Harry and Meghan's story had captured audiences around the world, from the United States to Asia, and from Europe to the Commonwealth nations. Every decision, every action, would be scrutinized not only by the British public, but by global observers. Public opinion, polls, and media coverage would all play a role in shaping the narrative. The stakes were enormous. A misstep could transform a calculated legal action into a public relations disaster. Yet Charles and understood that inaction carried a greater risk. Maintaining authority, preserving legacy, and safeguarding the monarchy's credibility outweighed the potential backlash. The day the letter was officially delivered, it was accompanied by a private briefing. Senior advisors outlined the timeline, potential consequences, and anticipated responses. The message was firm. This was not a negotiation. The Crown had made its decision, and it was resolute. For the first time in modern history, two members of the royal family were being formally confronted with the possibility of losing not just titles, but the privileges, protections, and ceremonial roles that defined their public identities. The weight of that reality was staggering, and yet, amidst the tension, there was a sense of inevitability. This action, while dramatic, had been years in the making, and the palace was finally ready to act. For Harry and Meghan, the implications were profound. Stripped of titles, they would no longer be officially recognized as working members of the royal family. Their roles, income, and access to royal protections would be dramatically altered. They would face a public reckoning, not just with the crown, but with global audiences who had followed their journey with fascination and judgment. And most significantly, they would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The decisions, the statements, and the choices that had brought them to this unprecedented moment. For a family accustomed to influence, privilege, and public favor, the stakes could not have been higher. Yet, even with all this gravity, there was an element of unpredictability. Royals are human, and humans are capable of the unexpected. How Harry and Meghan would respond, how the media would interpret every gesture, and how public sentiment would evolve remained unknown. Every advisor, every family member, and every observer waited with bated breath. And as the day turned into evening, one thing was certain. The royal ultimatum had set events into motion that could not be stopped. Every decision, every reaction, would echo for years to come, reshaping the narrative of the monarchy and defining the legacy of the individuals involved. The palace understood that history would remember this moment. It would be dissected, analyzed, and debated for generations. The decision to confront Harry and Meghan so directly was as bold as it was calculated. It was a declaration that the monarchy would not be swayed by public sentiment, media spectacle, or personal grievances. It was an assertion of authority, a reaffirmation of duty, and a recognition that some actions, no matter how personally difficult, are necessary to protect the institution itself. And as the night fell over Buckingham Palace, the weight of that realization settled over everyone involved. The royal ultimatum had been issued. The consequences were looming. Even in a family where tradition and protocol govern every move, Princess Anne has always stood apart. Known to the public as the Queen's eldest daughter, she is often overlooked in discussions about royal influence, overshadowed by her elder brother, King Charles, and her younger siblings' public personas. But those who have worked with her, served her, or studied her life know a different truth. She is a force of unparalleled discipline, integrity, and quiet authority. While others wield charisma or charm, and wields consistency, a razor-sharp sense of duty, and an unwavering moral compass. And now, as Buckingham Palace prepared to confront Harry and Meghan in the most serious family action of decades, it was Princess Anne whose voice carried clarity, precision, and unflinching resolve. The public often perceives Princess Anne as stoic, reserved, and perhaps even distant. But behind that composed exterior is a woman who understands power, responsibility, and consequences better than almost anyone in the royal family. Her upbringing under Queen Elizabeth's watchful eye instilled in her a deep respect for duty, an understanding of protocol, and an unshakable commitment to service. From an early age, Anne was taught that actions have consequences, not just for oneself, but for the broader institution one serves. This principle has guided her through decades of royal life, from diplomatic engagements to charitable work, and now, it would shape the most consequential decisions in her family's history. What makes Princess Anne particularly compelling in this story is her ability to cut through the noise. While media attention, personal emotion, and family loyalties often complicate royal decisions, Anne operates with clarity and focus. She does not seek headlines, public approval, or validation through social media. Instead, she measures the impact of actions through the lens of duty and principle. In the case of Harry and Meghan, she saw the growing public controversy, the escalating media coverage, and the repeated breaches of protocol not as isolated incidents, but as systemic threats that could undermine the monarchy's credibility. And she understood that, eventually, a decisive response would be required. Her involvement in the decision to strip Harry and Meghan of their titles was both strategic and moral. She recognized that passive tolerance would not resolve the situation. In fact, it would exacerbate it. Every public appearance by the Sussexes, every statement made in interviews, and every engagement outside the royal framework served to challenge the authority of the crown. By advocating for formal action, Anne was asserting that responsibility and accountability are not optional within the royal family, a principle she has lived by her entire life. Her voice in this matter was not only persuasive to King Charles, it was decisive. She provided the clarity and moral authority necessary to move from contemplation to action. Anne's approach is rooted in a lifetime of observing and navigating complex dynamics. She has seen power struggles, familial tensions, and public scrutiny up close, and she knows how to balance authority with diplomacy. She understands that overt displays of force or anger can backfire, undermining both public perception and internal cohesion. Instead, she relies on measured, deliberate interventions. Statements carefully crafted, meetings strategically scheduled, and actions timed to maximize impact. In this sense, her involvement in the Harry and Meghan situation is emblematic of her broader philosophy. Act decisively, act thoughtfully, and always act with the institution in mind. One key aspect of Princess Anne's influence is her ability to see beyond immediate emotion. Where others may react impulsively to perceived slights, media provocations, or family tension, and evaluates the long-term implications of decisions. In the case of the royal ultimatum, she assessed not only the immediate consequences for Harry and Meghan, but also the precedent it would set for future generations. Titles, privileges, and protections are not merely ceremonial. They symbolize authority, responsibility, and continuity. Allowing these to be challenged without consequence would weaken the monarchy's standing, both domestically and internationally. Anne understood this at a fundamental level, and she conveyed this urgency to her brother, ensuring that action was not only taken but taken with precision. Her relationship with King Charles is central to this story. As monarch, Charles holds ultimate authority over royal titles and privileges, but Anne's counsel has long been invaluable. She provides perspective, historical context, and an unflinching assessment of both risks and opportunities. In this crisis, her guidance was crucial. She highlighted the dangers of delay, the importance of formal procedure, and the need to maintain moral and institutional credibility. Her arguments were not based on emotion or personal feeling. They were rooted in principle, history, and duty. And in private conversations, she did not mince words. She was firm, direct, and unwavering. Qualities that helped solidify Charles's resolve to act decisively against the Sussexes. Beyond strategy, there is an emotional dimension to Anne's involvement. She has observed the fallout from Diana's death, the tensions between Charles and his sons, and the complexities of public perception regarding family conflict. She understands that royal decisions carry both personal and public weight. While the ultimatum is a legal and procedural action, it is also deeply personal. It impacts family relationships, legacy, and trust. Anne's involvement demonstrates her ability to navigate these dual dimensions, enforcing accountability without losing sight of the personal consequences. She recognizes that strength and compassion can coexist, even in the most difficult circumstances, throughout her life, and has consistently demonstrated an ability to act when others hesitate. Whether overseeing charitable initiatives, representing the monarchy abroad, or intervening in internal family matters, she approaches challenges with a combination of intelligence, pragmatism, and courage. In the case of Harry and Meghan, her involvement signals that the monarchy is not merely reacting. It is taking calculated, deliberate steps to protect its integrity. She ensures that the palace's actions are not arbitrary, but principled, measured, and defensible. A critical factor in maintaining both authority and public trust. Anne's role also underscores the importance of internal cohesion within the royal family. When one member challenges tradition or protocol, it threatens not just the immediate family dynamic, but the broader institution. By advocating for decisive action, she reinforces the principle that royal responsibilities cannot be selectively honored. Her stance sends a clear message: loyalty, accountability, and duty are not optional. They are the foundation of monarchy itself. And this principle is not lost on the broader family. Advisors, senior staff, and even other royals understand that Anne's influence is rooted in respect, authority, and an unassailable sense of duty. Her voice carries weight precisely because it is principled, not performative. In the weeks leading up to the formal ultimatum, Anne was involved in a series of strategic meetings, briefings, and discussions. She reviewed legal documents, evaluated media coverage, and considered public sentiment. She anticipated potential countermoves by the Sussexes, weighing risks and consequences. Every detail mattered: the timing of announcements, the phrasing of statements, the sequence of communications. Her meticulous approach ensured that when the ultimatum was delivered, it would be impossible to misinterpret, ignore, or dismiss. In essence, Anne became the architect of clarity and accountability, ensuring that the palace's actions were both authoritative and precise. But perhaps most importantly, Princess Anne's involvement demonstrates the quiet, unassuming power that can exist within a royal family. Unlike the spectacle often associated with Harry and Meghan, Anne's influence is subtle, strategic, and enduring. She does not seek validation through media appearances or public acclaim. Instead, she shapes outcomes through careful planning, principled guidance, and unwavering commitment to duty. In this crisis, that power is on full display. Her counsel has shaped decisions that will redefine the public, legal, and personal standing of two of the most famous individuals in the world. And yet, even as her authority guided the palace through these complex decisions, there remained an element of unpredictability. How would Harry and Meghan respond to her influence? Would they recognize the legitimacy of her counsel, or would they attempt to circumvent it through public appeals or media campaigns? These uncertainties loomed large, adding tension and suspense to every palace discussion. Anne, however, remained steady. She understood that the weight of history, duty, and principle would ultimately prevail, even against celebrity, media influence, or public opinion. Her role was not to predict outcomes, but to ensure that the crown acted decisively, responsibly, and morally. As the ultimatum moved from planning to execution, Anne's presence became a stabilizing force. She provided counsel, reassurance, and strategic insight to her brother, while also ensuring that the palace's actions adhered to tradition, law, and principle. Her involvement was both a shield and a sword. A shield to protect the monarchy from missteps and public backlash, and a sword to enforce accountability where it was most needed. In this sense, Princess Anne embodies a rare combination of strength, wisdom, and moral clarity, qualities that are indispensable in a crisis of this magnitude. And as the world waited, unaware of the full scope of internal planning, Princess Anne's influence quietly ensured that every move was deliberate, every consequence anticipated, and every message clear. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the quiet power of the Queen's eldest daughter would prove to be one of the most decisive factors in what was about to unfold. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, life outside the palace was supposed to be freedom, a chance to live life on their own terms, unbound by centuries of tradition, expectation, and scrutiny. But as the events of recent months would reveal, freedom comes with consequences, especially when you are born into or married into one of the most scrutinized families in the world. They had left, yes, but the monarchy was not about to leave them alone. And in many ways, the very actions that were supposed to protect them had now made them targets of an unprecedented royal maneuver. In the eyes of Buckingham Palace, Harry and Meghan had become outlaws, not criminals in the legal sense, but rebels in a centuries-old institution that prizes duty, loyalty, and hierarchy above all else. From the outside, their narrative was simple, compelling, and carefully curated. Harry, the adored younger son of Diana, was escaping the oppressive weight of tradition. Meghan, the ambitious, modern American woman, was seeking autonomy in a world that had long excluded her. Together, they presented a story of struggle against an outdated system, a fight for personal freedom, and a quest for identity beyond titles and ceremonies. Millions around the globe identified with their journey, applauding their courage and empathy. Yet, behind the carefully staged photo ops, interviews, and media statements, a more complex story was unfolding, one that involved breaches of protocol, perceived betrayals, and actions that the palace deemed both disruptive and unacceptable. Their decision to step back from official duties, often called Megxit by the press, was only the beginning. Initially, it appeared to be a strategic retreat. Gain independence, escape constant scrutiny, and live life on their own terms. But the palace saw it differently. Every move outside the monarchy was scrutinized, every public statement dissected for underlying criticism, and every high-profile appearance interpreted as a challenge to royal authority. To those inside Buckingham Palace, the Sussexes' actions weren't just personal choices. They were symbolic gestures, each one undermining centuries of protocol and hierarchy. And that symbolism, however subtle, could not be ignored. Public interviews amplified the tension. Each conversation, carefully orchestrated or impromptu, was dissected by the media and the monarchy alike. Statements that portrayed Harry and Meghan as victims of the institution created a narrative that challenged the royal family's reputation. The palace's internal communications described the impact as corrosive, a constant erosion of respect, loyalty, and credibility. But the Sussexes, emboldened by global attention, pressed forward. They engaged with high-profile journalists, gave intimate revelations, and positioned themselves as modern icons fighting for autonomy and mental health awareness. To supporters, these actions were courageous. To the palace, they were calculated provocations. Financial independence became another point of contention. While Harry and Meghan sought to establish their own ventures, partnerships, and revenue streams, the optics of wealth, media deals, and luxury travel heightened scrutiny. Critics argued that their commercial pursuits were inconsistent with the traditional responsibilities and modesty expected of royals. Supporters countered that independence was a fundamental right, particularly after years of being constrained by protocol. Behind palace walls, however, advisors viewed every deal as a challenge to the monarchy's authority, a public demonstration that titles and privileges were no longer required for influence or recognition. This perception would play a central role in the decision to issue a formal ultimatum. Even personal actions carried weight. The choices Harry and Meghan made in where to live, whom to associate with, and how to communicate with the public were interpreted as statements of loyalty, or the lack thereof. Buckingham Palace closely monitored social media, public appearances, and private engagements for signs of alignment with or deviation from royal expectations. Each deviation became part of a growing dossier that would be used to justify formal action. In essence, the palace treated these actions as a pattern, not isolated events, demonstrating that accountability in the royal family extends beyond ceremonial appearances and official statements. Yet, despite this mounting pressure, Harry and Meghan maintained a confident public persona. They framed themselves as misunderstood, highlighting mental health challenges, media intrusion, and the difficulties of navigating royal life. These narratives resonated deeply with supporters around the world, creating a divide between public opinion and palace perception. To the outside observer, the Sussexes were heroes resisting an outdated institution. To the palace, they were challenging authority in a way that threatened tradition, legacy, and institutional credibility. This disconnect, perhaps more than any specific action, was the catalyst for the royal ultimatum. Their relationships within the family were equally complicated. Strained ties with senior royals, disagreements over media engagement, and contrasting approaches to privacy created an environment ripe for conflict. Advisors described meetings where tension was palpable, where words carried weight far beyond their immediate context, and where every decision seemed to have cascading implications. Harry, deeply loyal to Meghan, became a mediator between his wife and the family he had grown up in. Meghan, assertive and determined, navigated a world she had married into, often challenging unspoken rules and traditions. Together, their dynamic was both powerful and destabilizing, a combination that drew attention, admiration, and criticism in equal measure. In the context of the royal ultimatum, the palace interpreted these dynamics as evidence of repeated, deliberate challenges to authority. Harry and Meghan were not just stepping outside the traditional roles. They were actively reshaping public perception of the monarchy, and not always in ways that aligned with established values. Every interview, podcast, and public appearance became part of a broader narrative that Buckingham Palace could not ignore. The actions that once might have been tolerated or quietly managed now demanded decisive intervention. And yet, the situation was complicated by Harry and Meghan's global popularity. Millions of supporters championed their cause, amplifying their narrative and increasing public scrutiny on the palace. This created a delicate balancing act. Act too forcefully and risk public outrage. Act too leniently and risk eroding institutional authority. It was a dilemma that demanded careful strategy, measured communication, and an unwavering commitment to principle. The stakes could not have been higher. Every step had to be calculated, every word measured, every action deliberate. This is where the palace's understanding of Harry and Meghan as royal outlaws became critical. They were no longer merely family members. They were public figures operating outside traditional expectations, whose choices carried consequences far beyond personal matters. The palace also recognized that perception is power. In a world where media influence rivals political authority, Harry and Meghan's ability to shape narratives could not be underestimated. Interviews with global media outlets, carefully timed announcements, and public statements all contributed to an image that challenged the monarchy's control over its own story. Advisors debated the implications. If left unchecked, what message would this send about the authority of the crown? What precedent would it set for future generations of royals? These questions fueled the decision to formalize the ultimatum, creating a response proportional to the perceived threat. Personal stakes were equally high. Beyond titles and privileges, Harry and Meghan faced the prospect of losing access to family resources, security protections, and ceremonial roles. For individuals who had built their identities around their royal connections, this represented a profound shift. The palace understood that the consequences were not merely symbolic. They would fundamentally alter Harry and Meghan's public and private lives. This made the ultimatum both a strategic necessity and a deeply personal confrontation. It was a moment where family, duty, and authority collided in a way that could not be reversed. And yet, despite all these pressures, Harry and Meghan remained unpredictable. Their responses, whether measured, defiant, or mediated through media channels, carried enormous potential to shape the unfolding drama. Buckingham Palace could plan meticulously, issue statements, and prepare legal measures, but they could not fully control the couple's actions. This unpredictability added tension, suspense, and a sense of inevitability to the story. Every move, every appearance, every statement could tilt the balance in ways no one could foresee. As the palace prepared to deliver the formal ultimatum, the world was largely unaware of the storm building behind the closed doors. Harry and Meghan were continuing their public engagements, media appearances, and business ventures, seemingly unaware of the full extent of the consequences about to befall them. Advisors whispered that the couple's underestimation of the palace's resolve would prove to be a critical miscalculation. And when the ultimatum was finally delivered, it was not just a document or a statement. It was a declaration. The rules of the monarchy apply to all, and deviation carries consequences. The warning was clear, the stakes undeniable, and the outcome uncertain. Harry and Meghan, the royal outlaws, had challenged an institution steeped in centuries of tradition. They had reshaped narratives, challenged authority, and captured the world's attention. But as the palace acted decisively, it became clear that even the most charismatic, popular, or media-savvy individuals are not immune to the consequences of challenging a monarchy built on principle, loyalty, and authority. The story of Harry and Meghan was no longer just about personal freedom. It was about legacy, accountability, and the very survival of an institution that had endured for generations. Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, decisions are rarely made in public. Every statement, every action, and every confrontation is carefully choreographed, reflecting centuries of protocol, discretion, and strategy. But when it came to the escalating situation with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the palace was forced into a rare and unprecedented series of secret meetings, behind-the-scenes discussions, and closed-door conversations. These were not mere strategy sessions. They were high-stakes deliberations that would determine the fate of two of the most famous royals in the world. The first meetings began quietly, in small rooms where only the most senior advisors, legal experts, and members of the royal family were permitted. King Charles convened these gatherings with a clarity of purpose that had rarely been witnessed in public. His directive was simple but uncompromising. Every possible scenario must be considered, every response meticulously planned, and every communication reviewed to ensure precision. Princess Anne, with her reputation for rigorous attention to detail, chaired many of these discussions, providing historical context, legal insight, and an unwavering voice of principle. Her ability to remain calm while dissecting complex interpersonal and institutional dynamics became a cornerstone of the palace's strategy. The content of these meetings was highly sensitive. Legal advisors outlined the precise mechanisms by which royal titles and privileges could be revoked, discussing potential challenges, public relations ramifications, and the broader constitutional implications. Every detail was scrutinized, from the timing of notifications to the language used in formal communications. The palace was acutely aware that even the slightest misstep could provide grounds for public criticism or legal challenge, potentially undermining the effectiveness of the ultimatum. Anne's insistence on precision ensured that the palace operated with a level of foresight and preparation that left little room for error. Yet secrecy was never absolute. As in any institution, especially one under constant global scrutiny, leaks began to emerge. Anonymous sources whispered to the press, offering tantalizing glimpses of internal deliberations without revealing the full picture. Each leak, whether deliberate or accidental, heightened the stakes, forcing the palace to consider not only the internal consequences of its decisions, but also the external narrative being shaped by the media. Advisors debated the likelihood of further disclosures, assessing which sources could be trusted and which might have motives to exaggerate or distort the truth. Every word spoken in these secret meetings carried both weight and risk. Some of the leaks hinted at tension between King Charles and Harry, painting a picture of a fractured father-son relationship fraught with misunderstanding, hurt, and unresolved grievances. Others suggested that Princess Anne had taken an unusually strong stance, advocating for decisive action that would leave no room for negotiation. The combination of media speculation and actual palace planning created a volatile mix. Harry and Meghan were perceived as rebels, while Charles and Anne were increasingly seen as a unified front determined to preserve the integrity of the monarchy. This perception, whether accurate or embellished, added dramatic tension to the unfolding story and intensified public curiosity. Among the most critical discussions were those regarding communications. How would the palace deliver the ultimatum? Would it be through formal correspondence, private conversation, or both? Advisors emphasized that tone, timing, and phrasing were paramount. The wrong word could inflame tensions, while the right approach might preserve some measure of dignity for all parties involved. Princess Anne's guidance was particularly influential in this area. Known for her meticulous nature, she stressed that clarity and formality were essential, ensuring that the message could not be misconstrued or dismissed as mere emotion. Her insistence on precision reflected not only her understanding of institutional necessity, but also her ability to navigate the delicate balance between family and duty. At the same time, Harry and Meghan were not idle. Though largely physically removed from palace life, they remained engaged through intermediaries, advisors, and media channels. Every public statement, interview, or social media post was carefully monitored, analyzed, and discussed in the context of the palace's strategy. The Sussexes' global influence meant that any reaction could have immediate, far-reaching consequences. This created a constant tension within secret meetings. The palace had to anticipate not only the couple's legal or logistical responses, but also the potential sway of public opinion, which could complicate the enforcement of the ultimatum. Some conversations, later leaked to the press, revealed the depth of personal emotion involved. Advisors reportedly described private exchanges where Charles expressed disappointment, frustration, and even sorrow at the need to act so decisively against his son and daughter-in-law. Similarly, Princess Anne's contributions were characterized by both calm determination and personal investment. She understood the stakes, the institutional integrity of the monarchy, and the personal consequences for family relationships. And her advocacy for action reflected a blend of principle and pragmatism. These leaks, though incomplete, painted a portrait of a family navigating a collision of duty, emotion, and public scrutiny. One of the most explosive leaks suggested that Harry and Meghan had attempted to circumvent the palace's authority by negotiating directly with media outlets. Reports indicated that they were in discussions about potential interviews, documentaries, and public appearances that could preempt or influence the formal ultimatum. This possibility heightened urgency within secret meetings, prompting advisors to accelerate timelines, tighten security around communications, and consider contingencies for rapid response. The palace recognized that in the age of instant global media, any delay or miscommunication could compromise the effectiveness of their actions. Leaked conversations also revealed contrasting perceptions of loyalty, responsibility, and accountability. Within the palace, advisors emphasized that titles and privileges are not mere symbols. They are tied to expectations of conduct, public service, and institutional loyalty. From this perspective, Harry and Meghan's behavior represented a sustained challenge to the monarchy's authority. Conversely, external media and some public commentators framed the couple as victims of rigid tradition, amplifying their narrative of independence and autonomy. The clash between internal assessment and external perception created a layered, high-stakes environment, one in which secrecy, strategy, and control were paramount. Perhaps most fascinating were the psychological dimensions revealed in some reports. Advisors described Harry and Meghan as highly media-conscious and strategically reactive, suggesting that the couple carefully curated their responses to maintain public sympathy while navigating private conflict. These insights shaped the palace's approach, emphasizing formality, precision, and timing. Every document, every correspondence, and every meeting was designed to anticipate potential maneuvers, neutralize public misrepresentation, and maintain institutional authority. The palace understood that enforcing the ultimatum required not only legal mechanisms, but also a sophisticated understanding of media dynamics and human behavior. Amid these secret meetings, tension between caution and urgency became a recurring theme. Advisors debated the risks of immediate action versus delayed response, weighing the potential for escalation against the dangers of inaction. Every scenario was analyzed: legal challenges, public backlash, media campaigns, and internal family dynamics. Princess Anne's voice remained consistent throughout. Decisive action, guided by principle and clear communication, was the only path forward. Her insistence on a methodical approach ensured that the palace maintained both moral and strategic leverage, even as uncertainty loomed. The leaks themselves became a double-edged sword. On one hand, they offered the public glimpses into the high-stakes deliberations unfolding behind closed doors, fueling curiosity and amplifying engagement. On the other, they introduced uncertainty, requiring the palace to continually adjust its strategy in response to partial or distorted information. Every reported detail, no matter how minor, could influence public perception, the couple's reactions, and the broader narrative surrounding the monarchy. Advisors recognized that in this environment, information was both power and risk, necessitating extreme vigilance and discipline management. As these secret meetings progressed, it became clear that the palace was preparing for a defining moment in royal history. The combination of legal planning, strategic communication, and principled counsel created a framework designed to withstand both internal resistance and public scrutiny. Every element, from timing to phrasing to security, was carefully orchestrated to maximize authority and minimize ambiguity. Princess Anne's influence was pivotal in this process, providing both guidance and moral clarity that shaped the palace's approach to a crisis unprecedented in modern times. Yet, even with meticulous preparation, uncertainty remained. Harry and Meghan's next moves were unpredictable, and the potential for public spectacle added a layer of tension that could not be fully controlled. Advisors knew that while the palace could enforce legal and procedural measures, it could not dictate perception or reaction. Every decision carried both immediate consequences and long-term implications, requiring constant vigilance, adaptability, and strategic foresight. The palace's secret meetings, though meticulously planned, were just one element in a complex, high-stakes confrontation that would unfold on multiple fronts simultaneously. In the end, these clandestine deliberations, combined with leaked conversations, set the stage for a confrontation that would redefine the relationship between the monarchy and the Sussexes. The palace had prepared thoroughly, blending strategy, principle, and authority into a single, decisive plan. But the human element, the unpredictable reactions of Harry and Meghan, the influence of public opinion, and the drama inherent in family conflict, ensured that the ultimate outcome remained uncertain. And as the first formal communications were prepared for delivery, one thing was undeniable. The secret meetings had only revealed a fraction of what was to come. The day the formal ultimatum was delivered began quietly, almost unremarkably, yet it would mark one of the most consequential moments in modern royal history. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors moved with a rare combination of precision and urgency. Every detail had been rehearsed, every phrase carefully vetted, and every contingency anticipated. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a direct, actionable communication from King Charles, backed by Princess Anne's unwavering counsel and the authority of the institution itself. The message was clear. The time for negotiation had ended, and the consequences of continued defiance were about to become very real. The ultimatum was drafted over several weeks, a meticulous process that involved legal advisors, royal protocol experts, and senior family counselors. Every word mattered. The language had to be firm enough to assert authority, precise enough to prevent misinterpretation, and formal enough to maintain the dignity of the monarchy. Stripping royal titles and privileges is not a casual matter. It carries legal, constitutional, and ceremonial implications. The palace understood that any misstep could provoke not just public backlash, but a challenge that might prolong the conflict indefinitely. The drafting of this document was a delicate balance of legal acumen, historical precedent, and human psychology. Princess Anne played a decisive role in shaping the tone of the ultimatum. Known for her directness and unflinching adherence to duty, she insisted that the document leave no ambiguity. There would be no room for interpretation, no loopholes to exploit, and no way for Harry and Meghan to dismiss the action as petty or symbolic. Anne's influence ensured that the document reflected both moral and institutional authority. It was not about personal animosity, but about protecting centuries of tradition, preserving public trust, and maintaining the integrity of the monarchy. Every word carried weight, and the palace was acutely aware that this was a moment that could not be undone. The delivery itself was carefully orchestrated. Representatives from the palace, including senior advisors and legal counsel, were dispatched to ensure that the ultimatum reached Harry and Meghan in a secure and controlled manner. The goal was to prevent leaks, misunderstandings, and media manipulation, while also making clear that the action was official and irreversible. In an era where social media amplifies every interaction, the palace had to anticipate the possibility of the message being made public prematurely. Every detail, from timing to delivery method to documentation, was scrutinized to ensure maximum impact and clarity. Harry and Meghan received the ultimatum in relative privacy, away from the public eye, but acutely aware that the world was watching. The document laid out the consequences of failing to comply with the expectations of the monarchy, the revocation of all royal titles, privileges, and ceremonial roles. It emphasized the principle that membership in the royal family carries responsibilities as well as benefits. Every breach of protocol, every public statement, and every action that challenged the monarchy's authority was now directly addressed. The language was firm but not vindictive, conveying the gravity of the situation without crossing the line into personal attack. This was a formal, binding measure, and it represented the culmination of weeks of preparation, strategy, and consultation. The immediate reaction was a mixture of disbelief, anger, and anxiety. Advisors described Harry and Meghan as stunned by the formality and directness of the communication. While they had anticipated some form of confrontation, the full weight of the ultimatum, the explicit revocation of privileges, and the formal declaration of consequences was unprecedented. For a couple accustomed to shaping narratives and commanding media attention, this represented a stark challenge to their autonomy. The palace, however, anticipated this response and had prepared countermeasures to maintain control over both internal and public narratives. Public speculation was instantaneous. Within hours, the press had begun piecing together reports, analyzing leaked details, and debating the implications. Headlines varied from royal family in crisis to Harry and Meghan face monumental blow, reflecting the global fascination with the unfolding drama. Advisors within the palace noted that controlling the narrative was critical. While some level of public speculation was inevitable, any misinformation or exaggeration could complicate enforcement of the ultimatum. Every statement made by spokespersons, media outlets, and even social media influencers was now being monitored for potential impact on public perception. The content of the ultimatum was also strategically designed to reinforce the monarchy's authority. It referenced historical precedent, legal obligations, and constitutional norms, demonstrating that this was not an arbitrary decision but one grounded in centuries of tradition. The document emphasized that privileges and titles are contingent on fulfilling responsibilities, and that deviation from expected conduct has consequences. By framing the action in terms of duty, principle, and institutional integrity, the palace ensured that the message could withstand public scrutiny while maintaining moral authority. Princess Anne's insistence on historical and legal grounding was crucial in lending credibility to the ultimatum. Despite the formality and clarity, the ultimatum also carried an emotional dimension. Advisors noted that the document was crafted to acknowledge the personal bonds between family members while maintaining institutional boundaries. It recognized that this action would be difficult, not only for Harry and Meghan, but for the broader family. The palace understood that authority must sometimes be enforced through difficult decisions, and that personal relationships must coexist with institutional responsibility. This nuanced approach reflected a rare blend of pragmatism, emotional intelligence, and strategic foresight, hallmarks of Anne's influence and Charles's leadership. Leaked details suggested that Harry and Meghan were simultaneously preparing their own public response, aware that any official communication would provoke immediate media attention. The palace anticipated this and had developed contingency plans to respond to public statements, interviews, or social media posts. Every potential reaction was mapped, debated, and accounted for in secret briefings. The goal was not only to enforce the ultimatum, but also to maintain control over how the situation unfolded in the public eye. In this sense, the delivery of the ultimatum marked the beginning of a carefully managed, multi-front confrontation that combined legal authority, institutional power, and media strategy. Observers noted that the psychological impact of the ultimatum was immediate. Harry and Meghan, accustomed to public support and media amplification, now faced the reality that the monarchy's authority could not be easily challenged. The formal language, historical references, and explicit consequences reinforced the seriousness of the situation. For a couple whose narrative had often emphasized victimhood, independence, and autonomy, this represented a direct counterpoint. The monarchy had rules, expectations, and consequences that applied universally, regardless of personal appeal or public sentiment. The ultimatum was both a legal instrument and a symbolic assertion of control, signaling that the palace would not yield to pressure or narrative manipulation. As the hours and days following delivery unfolded, the palace closely monitored reactions both inside and outside the family. Advisors analyzed statements, social media activity, and media coverage, anticipating potential counter-narratives or challenges. Harry and Meghan's allies, both personal and professional, were also active, offering interpretations, commentary, and strategic advice. Every communication, whether intended for the public or private channels, became part of a broader chessboard, with the palace maneuvering carefully to maintain authority while mitigating potential fallout. The stakes were enormous, and every decision carried the risk of amplifying tension or provoking escalation. Yet, even with meticulous planning, uncertainty persisted. How would Harry and Meghan respond in the coming weeks? Would they accept the terms privately, challenge them legally, or escalate the situation publicly? Advisors acknowledged that unpredictability was a constant factor, one that could not be fully controlled. The palace's strategy was to act decisively, enforce authority, and anticipate potential challenges, but the human element, personal pride, emotion, and instinct, remained a wild card. This tension between calculated action and unpredictable reaction